The lake has a certain stillness in the mornings that feels like a privilege, something private, as though the entire world is still asleep and I'm the only one awake to witness its quiet beauty. On that particular morning, I was cradling my coffee on the edge of my dock, feet dangling just above the ripples. The sun had just cleared the tree line, setting the water aflame in molten gold. Even the loons were lazy in their calls, stretching sound across the glassy surface. That's when I heard it, the sound of hard-soled shoes crunching across gravel. Not the soft shuffle of a jogger or the lazy flop of flip-flops, but deliberate, militant steps. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. In our lakeside community, only one person announced themselves with that kind of authoritative march, Karen, the self-appointed general of the Homeowners Association. She appeared on the gravel path like a storm cloud, visor gleaming, clipboard clutched under one arm like a battle standard. Her lips were already pursed in disapproval, and her eyes had that predatory gleam she got whenever she smelled a violation. She didn't greet me, she didn't even pause to admire the morning. She came straight to the point. "You can't keep your dock here," she barked, as though issuing an eviction order in a courtroom. "It violates Section 12, subsection B of the HOA covenant. I've already filed a notice. I expect it gone by tonight." I blinked at her, sipped my coffee, and let the steam fog my glasses for a moment. It wasn't the first time Karen had tried to rattle me, but her timing was impeccable, ruining a perfect morning with the subtlety of a chainsaw. "Morning to you too, Karen," I murmured, setting my mug down on the dock planks. She didn't smile. Karen never smiled when she was on official business. And for Karen, every waking moment was official business. She adjusted her visor as if to shield her eyes not from the sun, but from the audacity of my dock existing outside her approval. "You think I'm joking," she said, tapping her clipboard with a manicured nail that clicked like a metronome. "Section 12 clearly states, no private docks are permitted to extend more than 15 feet into community waters. Yours is 18. 18, I repeated, feigning confusion. "Funny, I measured it myself. Came out to 15. Your tape measure is wrong," she snapped, as though tape measures could conspire against her. It was classic Karen logic, immutable, absolute, resistant to the laws of physics. Behind her, the lake was perfect, dragonflies hovering like little helicopters, the gentle lap of water against the posts. It felt obscene that such a serene backdrop hosted such a petty battle. "Karen," I said gently, "it's 3 feet. The ducks don't mind. The fish don't mind. Why should you mind?" Her eyes narrowed. "Because rules are rules. If I let your dock stand, what's next? Someone paints their house taupe instead of beige. Someone plants a maple tree instead of an approved birch. Anarchy. That's what's next." I almost laughed into my coffee. Anarchy, over 3 feet of dock. But she wasn't joking. To her, these little ordinances were the dam holding back chaos, and she was the solitary sentinel. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, as though confiding in me. "You may think you're clever, ignoring notices, pretending you don't see the letters in your mailbox. But I run this HOA. If you don't comply, I'll have contractors remove the dock. And I'll send you the bill." There it was, the real weapon. Not rules, but invoices. Karen knew the HOA's greatest strength wasn't authority, it was bureaucracy. I didn't respond immediately. I let silence hang between us, broken only by the buzz of a cicada somewhere in the trees. My neighbors would have argued, maybe even begged. But I'd learned something about Karen over the years. She thrived on resistance. Push back, and she pushed harder. Ignore her, and she grew louder. But let her believe she'd won, and she strutted away satisfied, leaving you time to think. So I nodded, slow and deliberate, as though she had just passed down a sacred commandment. "Of course, Karen, I'll take care of it." For a brief moment, her face softened into smug triumph. She tapped her clipboard again, scribbled a note, "No doubt, compliance achieved," and turned on her heel. Her departure was as theatrical as her arrival. The crunch of gravel faded as she marched back up the path, visor gleaming like a crown, her clipboard held high. The queen of regulations, retreating to her fortress. I sat there for a long while after she left, staring at the water, my coffee cooling beside me. My dock creaked under my weight, old but sturdy, 18 feet or 15, depending on who held the tape measure. It had been here longer than Karen's tenure on the HOA board, longer than her pristine pontoon, longer than her crusade against imaginary infractions. The absurdity of it all made me laugh out loud, a sharp, almost bitter laugh that startled a gull into flight. She wanted to strip me of my dock, my little piece of peace, all because of 3 feet in a subsection buried in a document nobody but her had read cover to cover. But the thing about Karen was this: her arrogance always made her sloppy. She enforced rules without realizing she broke them herself. Her pontoon, for example. The shiny, over-engineered symbol of her self-importance. She tied it wherever she pleased, often on other people's docks, mine included. Always claiming it was temporary, always assuming nobody would object. That morning, as the sun climbed higher and the lake came alive with the distant hum of boats, I glanced at the empty space where she'd parked it the night before. Sure enough, there it was, bobbing lazily against the far end of my dock. Her ropes were sloppy, tied with more entitlement than skill. One knot sagged dangerously, threatening to give way with a strong breeze. The irony was exquisite. She had come to evict me from my own dock while her prized pontoon sat tethered illegally to the very structure she wanted removed. I sipped the last of my coffee and leaned back on my elbows, the idea forming like a storm cloud in my mind. I didn't plan it yet, didn't act, but I felt the seed of it take root. If Karen wanted to play games with ownership and rules, maybe it was time to show her what it felt like when the tables turned. That hour would come sooner than she expected. Karen's visit might have ended, but her shadow lingered long after her visor disappeared up the gravel path. I sat on my dock, letting the heat of the late morning sun settle across my shoulders, and every so often my gaze drifted back to her pontoon. It sat there, smug and bloated, ropes lolling like lazy serpents. The sight of it irritated me in a way I couldn't fully explain. It wasn't just a boat. It was her arrogance made tangible: glossy fiberglass, oversized cupholders, chrome railings that gleamed like the bars of a self-made throne. She paraded that pontoon around the lake the way a dictator parades tanks through the Capitol, not because she needed it, but because she wanted everyone to remember who held the power. I could still hear her voice echoing in my head. Section 12, subsection B. Contractors will remove it, you'll pay the bill. She'd said it with such certainty, as though the world itself bent to her clipboard. I hated that I hadn't pushed back harder. I hated that I had nodded, pretending to agree, letting her think she'd won. That was the Karen effect. She reduced people into cowed participants in her little theater of control. But as I stood and stretched, something caught my eye. Her pontoon had shifted slightly, nudged by the current. The rope on the stern had loosened further, the knot sagging precariously. It looked like one good gust might free it altogether. And that's when the thought hit me, not like a lightning bolt but like the slow unfurling of a dangerous flower: what if I didn't stop it? What if I let it drift? What if her precious pontoon, her floating palace, her mobile HOA headquarters, simply slipped away? The idea was delicious, almost intoxicating. I could picture it. Karen storming down later in the afternoon, visor askew, voice screeching across the lake, demanding to know where her boat had gone. And I, innocent as a lamb, shrugging with wide eyes: must have come loose, Karen. You should have tied it better. It would be poetic justice, no less than she deserved. But another voice in my head whispered: why settle for an accident when you can make a statement? I squatted down at the edge of the dock, fingers brushing the thick, sun-bleached rope that tethered her pontoon. My coffee mug still rested nearby, half empty, the last of the liquid gone lukewarm. I stared at the knot, at its sloppy loops and half-hearted hitch, and I thought about every letter she'd left in my mailbox. Every time she'd scolded me for leaving my trash bins out an hour too long. Every lecture about approved paint swatches, every sanctimonious email about community standards. The dock creaked as I leaned closer. My heart thumped, not from fear but from anticipation. All it would take was one pull. One slip of rope into the water. One act of rebellion against her tyranny. But rebellion wasn't enough, because then I glanced again at her pontoon, not just at the ropes, but at the keys dangling from the ignition, left carelessly there as though the lake itself was her private driveway. And suddenly my plan sharpened into something far bolder. Don't just let it drift. Take it. The idea was so outrageous, so intoxicating, that I laughed out loud, startling a turtle that had been basking on a nearby rock. I wasn't a criminal. I wasn't the kind of person who stole things. But this wasn't theft, not really. This was justice. This was balance. Karen had tried to evict me from my dock, the one place where I found peace, the one spot that belonged to me. She wanted to take it away, claim authority where she had none. But in her arrogance, she'd left her own pride and joy tied illegally to the very thing she threatened. What was it she always said at HOA meetings? Rules are rules. Well, two could play that game. I sat back down, forcing myself to breathe, to calm the manic surge of adrenaline. I didn't want to rush. Timing mattered. Karen thrived on immediate confrontation. She expected people to fold in the heat of the moment. But patience was my weapon. If I waited until the right hour, the lake could become my accomplice. By mid-afternoon, the water would be busier, dotted with speedboats and jet skis. People wouldn't notice another pontoon moving across the surface. And Karen herself would likely be at the clubhouse, terrorizing the volunteers into alphabetizing the bylaws. That gave me the perfect window. I glanced at the sky, still a flawless blue, the kind of day that begged for boldness. The loons had quieted, even the air felt charged, as though it too sensed the shift. I went back inside my cabin and set my mug in the sink. My hands itched with nervous energy. I busied myself with chores, stacking firewood, rinsing dishes, even sweeping the porch, but my mind kept drifting back to the dock, to the boat tied there like a prize waiting to be claimed. By noon, my resolve had solidified. I wasn't just fantasizing anymore. I was planning. I made a mental checklist. Gloves, to avoid leaving fingerprints. Sunglasses, to shield my face from casual recognition across the water. A backpack, to carry rope, just in case I needed to moor somewhere else. And most importantly, a calm demeanor. Because if anyone saw me, I couldn't look like a thief. I had to look like an owner, confident and unbothered. People rarely questioned what looked normal. I ate a quick sandwich but barely tasted it. Every creak of the dock outside teased my ears. Every slap of water against the hull of Karen's pontoon reminded me of the opportunity waiting. Finally, when the shadows began to shorten, I decided the time had come. I slipped on my gloves, grabbed my sunglasses, and slung the backpack over my shoulder. My heart beat hard enough that I could feel it in my throat, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was exhilaration, the electric charge before a leap. When I stepped onto the dock, the pontoon bobbed gently, ropes sighing against wood. The sun had climbed high, scattering diamonds across the surface of the lake. Somewhere, a child laughed, the sound carried by the wind. I crouched down, untied the stern rope first, then the bow. The fibers scratched against my gloves, the knots reluctant to yield. But eventually, the last loop fell slack. Karen's boat was free. I steadied it with one hand, the way you'd hold a wild horse before mounting. Then, without another thought, I stepped aboard. The deck wobbled beneath my weight, the faint smell of sunscreen and gasoline mingling in the air. I slid into the captain's chair, fingers brushing the wheel, and glanced down at the keys dangling there. A twist of the wrist, a growl of the engine, and Karen's pontoon belonged to me. The hour of reckoning had begun. The engine purred to life with a deep-throated rumble, startling a flock of geese into the air. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles whitening beneath the gloves. For a heartbeat, I thought the sound was too loud, too obvious, that every neighbor on the lake would come running to witness my crime. But no one came. Across the water, a speedboat revved and cut a sharp arc. Somewhere farther down, kids were shrieking as they cannonballed from a dock. Laughter, engines, splashing, the ordinary soundtrack of a summer afternoon. My noise blended into theirs, just another chord in the lake's chaotic symphony. I eased the throttle forward, and the pontoon slid away from my dock like a lazy beast stretching its limbs. The ropes drifted into the water, snake-like, severing the last connection between Karen's kingdom and my home. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. The breeze lifted my hair, carrying with it the smell of pine and gasoline. The water sparkled, reflecting the sky in 1,000 shattered pieces. And beneath it all, a giddy sense of rebellion bubbled inside me. Karen's voice still rang in my head, Section 12, Subsection B, but it sounded small now, diminished, as though the engine itself drowned her authority. I let the pontoon carry me out into the open water, past the boundary where my dock looked like a matchstick against the trees. From here, my little cabin was nothing, barely a smudge among the evergreens. But Karen's boat, my boat now, commanded the lake. People looked up when they heard its engine. They watched it glide across the water. I'd always thought of pontoons as clumsy, oversized beasts, floating living rooms, good for barbecues and loud families. But from the helm, with the lake unfurling before me like a canvas, I understood the appeal. It wasn't about speed, it was about presence. This was Karen's throne, and I had just usurped it. I let out a laugh, reckless and loud, startling myself. A nearby fisherman glanced up from his line, frowned, then turned away. To him, I was just another owner enjoying their property. The disguise was working. I circled the lake slowly at first, testing the wheel, feeling the subtle shift of water beneath the pontoons. Each turn grew smoother, each adjustment more confident. Soon, I was cutting gentle arcs across the surface, leaving a foamy wake behind me. And with each passing minute, the sense of triumph grew. I thought about pulling into someone else's dock, a temporary mooring, just to see Karen's boat where it didn't belong. Maybe in front of the Johnsons, the very family she'd fined last month for leaving garden gnomes on their lawn. Or the Smiths, who'd been reprimanded for an unapproved fire pit. The symbolism would be delicious. But a sharper thought cut through the giddiness: Karen would notice. Sooner or later, she'd storm down her perfect gravel path, visor gleaming, expecting to find her pontoon tied smugly where she'd left it. Instead, she'd see nothing but empty water, ropes dangling in shame. The image made me grin so wide my cheeks hurt. I almost wished I could be there to watch her reaction, the gasp, the outrage, the shriek carried across the neighborhood like a siren. But with triumph came risk. Because when Karen realized her boat was missing, her first thought wouldn't be theft. She wasn't imaginative enough for that. No, she'd think noncompliance. She'd think someone broke a rule. And once that suspicion took hold, she'd come hunting. I tightened my grip on the wheel. The lake no longer felt infinite. Its shores crowded in, dotted with cabins and docks, each one a potential vantage point for prying eyes. I wasn't invisible. I was parading her stolen pride like a banner across the water. That realization made my pulse quicken. I eased back the throttle, steering toward the far side of the lake where the shoreline was wild, tangled with reeds and low-hanging branches. Few cabins dotted this side, and those that did were half hidden behind pines. The pontoon drifted into the shadows, its growl softening to a purr. I cut the engine completely and let momentum carry me forward until the reeds brushed the pontoons with a hiss. Silence fell, heavy and sudden. The lake, once a stage for my rebellion, became a cloak of secrecy. I sat there for a while, heart pounding, trying to steady my breath. From here, I could see the distant sprawl of Karen's side of the lake. Her dock was barely visible, a sliver of wood jutting into the glare. No one moved on it. Not yet, but any minute now. I imagined her at home, sipping tea in her spotless kitchen, visor hanging on the hook by the door, clipboard resting beside her. At some point, she'd glance out the window. She always did. She'd expect to see her pontoon bobbing dutifully at my dock. And when she didn't, I pictured her face twisting into that mask of righteous fury, the way her nostrils flared when she smelled a violation. I pictured her scrambling for the phone, dialing HOA board members, rallying her troops. And I pictured myself, hidden in the reeds, listening to the chaos from across the water. The thought made me chuckle again, but it was a quieter laugh this time, edged with nerves. Because the truth was, I hadn't thought this far ahead. I'd seized the boat, yes. But now what? What did one do with a stolen pontoon? I could take it for a joyride. I could hide it in the reeds until nightfall. I could even, and the thought thrilled me, anchor it in the middle of the lake and let her swim for it. But each option carried risk. And then, before I could settle on anything, I heard it, a shrill, furious voice carried faintly across the water. Even from this distance, I knew it instantly. Karen. I grabbed the binoculars from the cup holder. Of course she kept binoculars on her boat, probably for spying on neighbors, and lifted them to my eyes. There she was, standing at the edge of her dock, visor gleaming like a war helmet, fists planted on her hips. Even from half a mile away, her posture radiated outrage. She was shouting something, though the words were lost in the distance. Then she pointed, directly across the water, toward me. My stomach dropped. Had she spotted me already? Impossible. I was half hidden in the reeds. But Karen's rage wasn't rational. She didn't need evidence. All she needed was suspicion. She turned abruptly, storming back up the path. I imagined her bursting into her house, dialing the HOA emergency contact list. Yes, they had one, rallying board members like generals before battle. The game had changed. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was war. I started the engine again, softer this time, coaxing the pontoon deeper into the reeds. The sound of cicadas swallowed the growl, masking me. The lake, once a playground, now felt like a battlefield. Karen had sounded the alarm, and I was behind enemy lines with her most prized possession. And as the afternoon light deepened, one truth became clear: there was no turning back. The late afternoon sun dipped low, painting the lake in long streaks of amber. Shadows stretched across the water like reaching fingers. I sat behind the wheel of Karen's pontoon, engine idling in the reeds, heart hammering against my ribs. I'd expected guilt by now, some heavy stone of regret pressing down on me. Instead, all I felt was adrenaline. The thrill of rebellion surged in my veins, almost intoxicating. I had done it. I had taken her floating throne, her pride and joy. For once, the tyrant of the HOA was powerless. But power vacuums don't stay empty for long. Across the lake, Karen's dock erupted with activity. She wasn't alone anymore. Even from this distance, I could make out figures gathering, her loyalists. The self-appointed sentinels of community standards. Clipboard disciples in polos and khakis. The board, they clustered around her like bees to their queen, gesturing wildly, pointing across the water, some with binoculars. I ducked lower instinctively, though reeds already camouflaged me. The pontoon rocked gently beneath me, betraying my nervous energy. Then Karen herself stepped forward, megaphone in hand. A weapon she wielded often at HOA meetings. Her voice blasted across the lake, garbled but unmistakable. Return. Boat. Immediately. Illegal. Trespass. Police. I winced. Even muffled by static, her screech cut through me like glass. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. She's yelling HOA bylaws through a megaphone at a lake. But laughter caught in my throat when I noticed something else, flashing lights. Down the shoreline, a sheriff's boat pulled away from a distant dock, lights strobing red and blue against the water. My pulse spiked. Karen had wasted no time, she'd called in reinforcements. Panic threatened to crack my bravado. This wasn't just neighborhood theater anymore. This was real. Stealing a boat wasn't a prank in the eyes of the law. They wouldn't see Karen's tyranny, only my crime. I gripped the wheel, mind racing. Options collapsed around me. Hide. Impossible. The lake was open, the reeds only a temporary cloak. Run. The pontoon wasn't built for speed, a sheriff's boat could outpace me easily. Surrender. The thought curdled in my stomach. To hand Karen her victory after everything. Unthinkable. And then it hit me. The answer had been under my feet all along. This wasn't about keeping the boat. It wasn't about escape. It was about message. Karen had tried to evict me from my dock, the one place of peace I had left. She'd used rules as weapons, wielded authority like a cudgel. She thought she owned the lake, the board, even us. And now, I held her crown jewel. If I couldn't win by running, I'd win by spectacle. The idea unfurled in my mind, dangerous and liberating. Don't hide it. Don't keep it, sink it. The sheriff's boat drew closer, cutting across the sunlit ripples, siren whooping once for effect. Karen's megaphone crackled again, her voice shrill with triumph. You are surrounded. Return. Pontoon. Now. I stood tall in the captain's chair, raising both arms wide like a preacher before his flock. My laughter rolled out over the water, sharp and wild. For the first time, Karen faltered. Even through binoculars, I imagined her visor slipping, her confidence wavering. Ladies and gentlemen of the lake, I bellowed, my voice carrying over the water. Your queen has declared me an outlaw. A criminal. All because of 3 feet of dock. Murmurs rippled across the shoreline. Neighbors were watching now, gathering on their docks, curious. The standoff had become a show. Well, I roared, if rules are rules, then so be it. And before doubt could creep in, I shoved the throttle forward. The pontoon surged from the reeds into open water, engine groaning under the sudden demand. Spray hid my face as I steered directly toward the center of the lake, heart pounding with reckless clarity. The sheriff's boat followed, siren wailing. Karen shrieked into her megaphone, words dissolving into static and fury. Neighbors pointed, gasped, phones raised to record. Halfway to the lake's center, I cut the wheel sharply. The pontoon turned, wobbling under the sudden shift. I yanked open the storage compartment and grabbed the anchor, heavy, rusted iron with a thick rope. I hoisted it above my head. Gasps echoed faintly across the water. For a moment, the world froze, me, silhouetted against the sinking sun, anchor poised like judgment itself. Karen's voice cracked through the megaphone. Don't you dare. I dared. With a roar, I hurled the anchor down through the deck. Wood splintered, fiberglass cracked, the boat shuddered violently. Water gushed upward in a geyser of spray. The pontoon groaned, listing as its wound widened. Chaos erupted. Neighbors screamed, phones filming wildly. The sheriff's boat accelerated, wake foaming in its path. Karen wailed into her megaphone, incoherent with rage. But I I felt only liberation. The pontoon sank fast, bubbles roaring around my legs as water surged across the deck. I dove overboard, the shock of cold closing around me like a fist. For a moment, the world was muffled, silent but for the rush of bubbles and my own thundering pulse. When I surfaced, gasping, the pontoon was already halfway under, its once pristine railings vanishing into the lake. Karen's crown jewel, her floating throne, swallowed whole. I treaded water, laughing between gulps of air, as the sheriff's boat reached me. 2 deputies hauled me aboard, muttering curses, but I hardly heard them. My eyes were locked on the shore. Karen stood on her dock, visor askew, clipboard clutched uselessly at her side. Her face was pale with disbelief, fury quivering through her frame. For once, she had no words. Neighbors whispered, some covering smiles, others recording every second. Karen's authority, her untouchable reign, drowned with her pontoon. The deputies cuffed my wrists, reading me rights, but their voices were distant. I wasn't thinking of charges or consequences. I was thinking of freedom. Not freedom from law, but from Karen. Because no matter what the WA tried to spin, no matter how many meetings she called, no matter how many memos she circulated, everyone would remember this day. The day Karen tried to evict me from my dock, and I seized her boat, only to send it to the bottom of the lake. The day the Queen of Rules was dethroned. And as the sheriff's boat carried me back to shore, I couldn't stop smiling.